I don't know. Like Sam was saying, I hope that next week, by the time this episode comes out, everything is different. I hope there's some heads on spikes.
Heads on spikes.
Yep. Not literally, but well, you know, if it happens, it happens.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 433 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is September 15th, 2023. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be two or three swear words in this episode.
2 or 3.
One of them is shit.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's one down. Keep an eye out for the rest. It's kind of like Easter eggs. They're going to be in there somewhere.
Or do you mean
spot them?
Do you mean different words or instances of or utterances of profanities?
We'll keep that one a mystery.
Because I thought I was just preparing like the key of like, well, here's the kind of profanity you'll be expecting.
Nope, you've already cashed in on one of the three.
Shit. No.
Already. Oh, okay.
There's
Well,
two.
there we go. All right, now when's the next one coming? We'll find out. Stay tuned. We'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep the podcast running.
Speaking of money grabs, I assume.
Yeah. Okay. So something happened this week that we need to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm going to lay a little bit of groundwork for those who are a little bit less
In the industry.
well versed in the industry. So when you're making a video game, you need to have some tool to create it. If you're a real hardcore programming badass, you might just be like, all I need is Notepad, as in like Windows Notepad, and C++, and you just write it raw somehow. You just write this raw game engine, write all the collision code, the rendering pipeline. You could do that. It would take for fucking ever. And also you would have a lot of issues with trying to keep up with all the updates of compatibility with like video card drivers and Windows updates. And what if you want to make it for iOS? Well, now you got to rewrite all the code, and that's fucked up, right? So building the entire stack of the software to make your game from scratch is not really feasible for almost anybody except for the largest of dev teams, which is, for example, like Starfield, I believe, is made in a proprietary engine that Bethesda works with. And you know, that engine has its specific limitations and stuff like that. And you see that in the game, right? So like if you build your own engine, you got to keep developing that engine and maintaining it and expanding it. And that's a ton of work, right? So what do we do as smaller developers? Well, we just get an off the shelf engine. So for our team, we use Game Maker because it's super fast to develop. It's super flexible and it's great for 2D. And it allows us to easily port to everything. Yeah. Whatever we want to put it on.
That's a
Mac,
big one,
iOS.
Yeah.
Yep. So there's quite a few other engines. The most popular are Unity and Unreal. Okay. So a lot of popular games are made in these. Like Firewatch is made in Unity, Rust, Kerbal Space Program, Hearthstone, Cult of the Lamb.
If you've played basically any indie game, you've probably
in the past 10 years.
You definitely played a game that's made in Unity. You might have played a game that's made in Game Maker. And if it was really shiny, then you played one that's made in Unreal. That's sort of
yeah. So like Fortnite, Rocket League, like these are Unreal Engine games. So the interesting thing about these engines is they're really sophisticated. They have an incredibly deep well of expertise that you can develop to get really good at working with them. And they also each have their own programming setup, right? So like if you're using Unity, you're going to use C#, but it's actually sort of like an add-on to C# that Unity has their own additional layer of scripting that you can use with it for handling all the physics and everything else. So like if you've been a Unity developer for the past 10 years, then you have learned the shit out of that. Unity C# programming, right?
If you wanted to get a job, you would get a job as a Unity developer, right? It's not just a programmer who makes games. No. It's a specific engine understanding that is required.
It's like with any sort of pair of programming languages where learning one programming language makes the next one easier, like human languages too, right? Because you learn all these concepts that are shared between, but in the same way that if you learn Spanish, that doesn't really transfer to Chinese, like some of the concepts are there. The fact that you are able to learn Spanish means that you have a bunch of you've gotten rid of a bunch of ideas about how language works that were just narrowed to your, we're one language. But so you're better positioned, but it's not transferable. And it's the same with game engines.
Yeah. So you might learn Chinese faster, but it's still going to take you a while, right?
Yeah.
You can't just jump in and go to China.
So if you needed
right?
somebody who knew Chinese, you wouldn't go take a Spanish speaker and be like, well, you can get up to speed. You would go find somebody who already speaks Chinese, right? It's the same deal with the game engine. As if you need a programmer, you get one for that language.
Yeah, it's an expertise thing, right? And on top of that, people develop all kinds of proprietary tools. So like in our case, we have a huge tech stack that we built over 10 years, ranging from UI frameworks to tons of custom game code to custom web code to our deployment pipeline. And all that stuff is 100% part of our usage of Game Maker.
Yes, we couldn't pick up, say, Unreal or Unity and be where we are in terms of our sophistication with deployments, with a whole variety of things that we've solved already. We would have to resolve all these problems in a different way, right?
Yeah. So I guess another way to put it would be if we switched from Game Maker to Unity or switched from Game Maker to Unreal, it would take us 3 or 4 years probably just to get back to where we currently are.
So big deal.
That's
big deal. Choosing your engine.
And that means whatever game project we were working on or whatever would not move forward in that time. We would just be rebuilding our expertise and tools, right? So in other words, if you once you're really deep into an engine, you are in it. It has a gravity well, and the escape velocity required is immense, right? And so you're trapped. Yes. Okay. So what has happened this week is Unity, which, as I mentioned, is I believe it's the most popular engine for off-the-shelf development,
especially
it's
for
used in
mobile.
AAA all the way down to solo, right? Yeah, hobbyists use it, schools use it, whatever. So they announced something this week, which is so stupid that it feels like a prank, and I feel stupid talking about it, but we're going to talk about it
because it's wild.
I can't imagine a universe in which somebody decided to do this and then didn't immediately go, wait, that's the dumbest fucking idea I've ever had. Right?
Walk us through.
So here's what they did.
Cloud of stupidity.
So the top level folks at Unity decided we need more money. Okay. And they announced a change to their pricing structure where normally the way it works right now as a developer is you've got sort of different tiers of subscriptions. Well, if you want to use Unity, you just pay Unity. You pay the company a subscription and you'll pay for a number of seats. So if we have 6 people on our team, we would just subscribe for 6 seats or whatever, right? And we would just pay that. I don't remember if they have a revenue share concept.
They do not.
At this point. So Unreal does. Unreal, if you're using Unreal Engine, then they have a revenue share where after a certain point, you will owe a percentage of the revenue that your game earns to Epic Games, which is the makers of Unreal Engine.
I believe it's 5% after $1 million or $200,000, something like that.
Yeah, but importantly, it's correlated to how much income you're getting, right? So you can predict it and you can absorb that kind of a cost and whatever, right? So in both cases, you have a predictable cost that you can understand and it's tied to something that's measurable, right? So no problem. Well, not anymore. Now, big problem, because Unity announced that they are going to be, starting January 1st, charging developers each time a player installs a copy of their game. Mm-hmm. All right. So, and this fee will be anywhere from 1 cent to 20 cents per install, depending on a whole convoluted mess of variables about how many units have been downloaded, what tier of subscription you're in, how much revenue you've made over a certain. It's very complicated. But I guess a great analogy just to kind of show how stupid this is would be let's say you subscribed to Adobe and you got Photoshop. And then you're like, I want to be an artist. And you've made a ton of art and you've learned the shit out of Photoshop.
And you've been paying for a Photoshop license for the whole time. Years. Yep.
Yeah. And and you're getting commissions, and you've got like a profile on ArtStation, and you got your images are all over the place. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly Adobe comes out and they say, hey, artists, we've decided that we're going to charge you 1 cent every time somebody looks at one of your pictures on the internet. Mm-hmm. Then you'd say, I'm sorry, what the fuck? Yeah. Like, I don't control that. And also, I don't make a cent every time somebody looks at one of my pictures.
That's the big one.
Why should you make a cent every time somebody looks at one of my pictures? It makes no fucking sense. So I did some math on this. Okay, so let's say, and also the Unity, they tried to downplay it by saying that this fee only kicks in once you have surpassed 200,000 installs. Okay.
Installs, again, it's not revenue based, despite the fact that it costs you money, which is right. The kicker, right?
So, for example, let's say you are a solo dev and you're like, I'm just going to make a fun hobby project, and you make it and then you just put it up on itch.io for free, which is a very common thing to do. Maybe you participated in a game jam, right? Whatever. You made something like Surgeon Simulator was a game jam game, mm-hmm. right? And it ended up getting millions of downloads with its little demo. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's say you participate in a game jam, you put your game up there, you get like 2.2 million downloads because it's a small little fun dumb game, and mm-hmm.
Maybe a YouTuber plays it. Someone picks it up and plays it, and they're like, and you get 2 million downloads. Boom.
You get 2.2 million downloads. All of a sudden, 3 weeks later, you get a bill from Unity for $400,000. Okay. Mm-hmm. That is actually what this is.
Yeah.
So it has flipped the script now, where developers who have been using Unity for all this time are suddenly shitting their pants because if their game does well, they are financially ruined.
They're bankrupt.
If their game gets a lot of installs. Okay. So this is like, let's say you could guarantee that every copy of the game that's installed is legitimate, as in somebody purchased it for money and they installed it a single time on a single device, right? Mm-hmm. In that extremely narrow concept of a fictional world that doesn't exist, this model would be fine in the sense that it would put a small dent in your income potentially.
It'd be fine if you were selling.
If you were doing a paid game,
it still wouldn't be fine because you can't do demos. You can't do like.
Well, that's what I'm saying is like
free Steam weekend.
If you do that, you're fucked, right? But even more importantly, if you're making a free to play game, let's say you're making a free to play game and you average, like 5 cents a player, mm-hmm. right? In terms of your ads or in-app purchases or whatever, you are fucked because you had to pay 20 cents for each of them to install it, right? If you're making a paid game, there are pirates.
Yes.
There's no way to distinguish between a pirated copy of a game and a legitimate copy of the game unless it's an always online game, except you're not the one deciding who's a pirate and who isn't. Unity is.
Yeah, even then,
so
because the engine doesn't know.
Yeah, the engine
doesn't know. Yeah. And on top of that, so like one of the things that we know from our own telemetry, where when we're working on Levelhead in early access, we hooked up a bunch of telemetry so that we could see like how people were progressing through the campaign and stuff like that. Well, we anonymized all that data by generating a unique ID that's just like a random string of characters, right? So we don't know who is doing what. All we know is just aggregated stats on how many people got this far, right? So this is a pretty common concept. It's like you just generate a unique ID, sync that to your server, and then you save that unique ID to disk on the device, right? Well, if the player uninstalls your game and purges the save cache, that unique identifier is lost. So when they install the game again, you treat it as a new install because you literally can't do anything else. There's no other way to know whether it's a reinstall or a new first install, right?
And if as we're describing this, if it feels like it's so dumb that we have to have a misunderstanding about how this works.
That's just how dumb it is.
We don't. Yeah, Unity has confirmed, in fact, most of the points that we were talking about here.
And they did it hilariously because they were like, we want to clear up some confusion. And they just clarified exactly the points that everybody thought were true. And everyone's like, oh, okay, no, we're not confused. That's not the problem here. The problem is this is bad and dumb.
It's extremely bad and dumb. Okay, so now, all right, so that's all right. So piracy is an issue. If you make a free game,
fucked.
Whether it's a free to play game that's actually monetized, you're fucked. Whether it's a demo, you're fucked. Mm-hmm. Or if it's just like a jam game you made and just wanted people to play it, you are fucked. Okay, so that's kind of like the framework of the problem. But there are more layers to it. So there are tons of developers who, for example, are planning on releasing their games into Xbox Game Pass
subscription services
early next year.
Netflix, as we are, right?
Right. So the way that those deals typically work is there's going to be some kind of fixed payment that the platform will pay to the developer to port the game or whatever. And then in some cases, depending on performance of the game, if it's like one of the top performing games, the game will also generate some kind of residuals off of the playtime and stuff, right? But Game Pass has 25 or 30 million subscribers, right? So if you put your game on there, you may get 3 or 4 million installs, right? But that doesn't give you more revenue necessarily, depending on the deal that you have.
Yep.
And so every install is a negative. Now as a developer, you want to minimize the number of people playing your game because it will financially ruin you. But a lot of these developers, they're on contract. Like they have a Unity game. They have already signed a deal.
They have to deliver a game to Microsoft by
they've got
date,
milestones. Right? Yeah. And on top of that, if they back out of the contract, there's probably going to be consequences with that. And the only recourse they have is to try to like rebuild their game in a whole new engine. And there's just no time.
Yeah.
Like nobody has the runway to do that.
It's not like, oh, let me take my my Excel sheet and then like save it and put it into Google Sheets. And it's like roughly the fucking same. No, like absolutely not. We're talking, you're talking burn down the studio and start a new studio, which is what you may as well do. If you have, say, like we do.
But a new studio full of people who have no fucking idea how to use the tools that you're using, right? Like it's just really bad, right? And so these developers are trapped and they're panicking and they're thinking like, what do we do? Mm-hmm. So Unity, again, released a, quote, clarifying statement, which is it's Mexico's gonna pay for the wall levels of unhinged nonsense, which is Unity said, hey developers, don't worry about that. If you're publishing on a subscription service, we'll just send the bill directly to them. As in, Unity is gonna send a bill to Microsoft,
who they don't have a contract with, by the way.
Who never agreed to this. Like, Microsoft didn't sign any fucking end-user license agreement with Unity. Like, and so...
Or Nintendo.
Yeah.
PlayStation, right?
And again, like, just to kind of really, really emphasize how deep the well of stupidity here is, there are Nintendo games made with Unity. There are Marvel games, so Disney games made with Unity, right? Sony has made games with Unity. These are companies that are some of the most famously litigious companies in the world. They will sue anyone. Nintendo sues people who play their games on YouTube.
Yes.
like they don't give a fuck. They'll sue you if you just walking by, right? Like that's how Nintendo works. And so there's also now a bunch. So the consequence now is like scores of developers are making public statements on Twitter, basically saying we have no choice but to pull our game.
Yeah,
like,
and this is
come next year. We can't do it.
Yeah,
anymore,
and again, like
right?
if you're having a hard time fathoming what in the fuck this is, the reality is that if this happens, it genuinely, actually destroys, just straight up destroys a humongous segment of the industry that currently exists, but then also like a bunch of smaller studios who had just are working on their first things, right? As well as game jam culture. Like the implications are fucking enormous, absolutely enormous, to the point where it's like, it's as if you said, okay, anybody who kicks a soccer ball now has to pay whoever the fuck makes soccer balls a cent every time you kick a soccer ball.
No, it's not even that. It's if you get a soccer ball kicked at you, you have to pay a cent to the person who made the soccer ball.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Like you're as a developer, you're in the middle, and there's a person to your left, which is Unity, and there's a person to your right, which is the player. Mm-hmm. Unity, so the person to your left is watching the person to your right, and they are charging you based on what this other person is doing, and you are not involved in it at all.
Yeah, and you don't get to clarify how the fuck they're counting, and it turns out that they're somewhat blind and a little crazy, they're a little drunk, can't see properly, and there's a lot more people on your right than there are, of course, with one on your left, and so it's this whole thing where it's like, okay, you can't actually count. You can't actually count, but you're going to tell me how many people you counted.
Yeah. And after all this, they're basically saying, trust us. We'll be able to estimate this just fine.
But also one of the famously unsolved – there's a famous set of unsolved problems here, which is like, how do you tell a pirate from a non-pirate? How do you tell one user from another user, all while protecting user privacy and all this kind of stuff, right? These are literally unsolved and unsolvable problems. And the only way this mechanism could work is if Unity had solved those problems. And one of the jokes that I've been seeing is people are like, if Unity actually has the technology to do this, they should just be selling that technology because they would make way more money doing that than off of this absurdist, idiotic 20 cents.
If there's just a basic, because ultimately it would be a basic like API that you could just query like, hey, is this a legitimate copy of the game? Yes or no. Right. And their little API would be like, yep, it is. And you'd be like, great. And then the game can run, right?
Amazing.
But that's impossible. Yep. Right. So the other kind of fucked up angle to all this is, like I said, this means a developer will get charged by Unity for something the player does, regardless of whether.
Yeah, that sounds like a bad incentive for, angry
malicious
gamers.
Actors. Right. Yeah. So if there's one thing we know about the gamer community at large, it's that they are famously level-headed and chill and don't overreact to anything.
They don't weaponize anything. Steam review bombing?
So,
never heard of it.
Yeah, no, but really, like if a game leans too political in a certain direction, well, to the left.
It's not even political. If it mentions some facts that are true. That
so for example, like there's a joke in the gaming community that if you're a video game developer, there's two genders, male and political, right?
Exactly.
Which is like if you do anything other than have your protagonist be a middle-aged straight white man, you're apparently making a political statement, and you will have people get angry at you about that, depending on some things, right? And in some cases that, like right now, you can have hordes of gamers engage in review bombing campaigns. This is their way of sabotaging a game that they don't think should exist, right? But ultimately, that doesn't directly take money out of the bank account of the game studio.
It can prevent you from making money, but it doesn't siphon money away that you already have made.
Yes.
And importantly, to review a game on something like Steam, you still need to buy it. And you might refund it, but like you still have to do something, right? So like your purchase of it generates one review, right? You yourself can't do like 30,000 thumbs downs unless you bought 30,000 copies on 30,000 different Steam accounts, right? Well, this is different because, like we talked about earlier, tracking an install is dependent on storing an identifier in a local cache, in a local save folder. Well, it's very easy to just delete the contents of a save folder and then boot the game up again, and boom, that's a new install. Then you could close the game, delete the contents of the save folder, boot it up again.
And you can go
that's another
fancier by like getting a hardware ID of some sort, right? Which is harder to do, depends on what the kind of technology you're using can do, and it's a much more privacy invasive thing because those are unique identifiers that live on your device, right? But also those are spoofable too.
And guess what? Yep. Within 2 days now, I think people have already written some scripts to spoof them.
Some of the Rust community, just to see, they figured out that they could put together a reinstall hardware spoofing script that will generate a fake device ID and then do stuff that will trick the game into thinking that it's a fresh install. And they made a bot that can just run this thing continuously 24 hours a day, generating thousands and thousands of fake installs every day.
Each one of which
on one machine. Each one of which
costs 15, 20 cents.
Right. And so now it's like, all right, now you've given players the ability to financially, or rather, you've given any player the ability to financially ruin a game studio if the studio does something that they don't like.
Yeah. And again, I want to really point this out that like Unity is used by such a humongous portion of the games industry that this is not a like, oh yeah, you took like a random game engine and there's like 7 people who use this thing and it's some like,
this is like 2/3 of the games development industry. I would
yes, it's insane.
Bet, right. I don't know the actual number, but like it's an overwhelming number.
I think for mobile, it's easily that
probably
fraction.
More than that. Yeah. Because Unreal is very high fidelity, and I think it's much tougher to make 2D things, and it's much tougher to make well optimized mobile games with Unreal Engine. And Unity is well positioned for both 2D and 3D and mobile PC, and it's easy to port to consoles and stuff as well, right? And so it's just ubiquitous.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a cataclysmic event for the industry, I guess is the easiest way to put it. And you're talking about devs who might be 2 or 3 years into a project that might be supposed to launch next year, or even maybe supposed to launch in a couple of years. Who knows? But they have no recourse. So you just have to rebuild your stuff.
Just nothing you can do.
Yeah. And even if you buy the arguments that Unity and then some apologists are making that like, oh, like really for this actually isn't a big deal. And like we can trust that you could probably work with them if something goes wrong and blah, blah, blah. Even if that were all true and even if this just was a good model, it's not, but if it was, right? The way that they have applied this via their terms and their like licensing of Unity, the game engine to developers, is this absurdist thing where it's retroactive. So it applies to games that are already in the market made with other versions of Unity. They claim whether that's legally actually even possible is questionable. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know enough about the law in this area.
It means that every game made in Unity ever.
That
beginning
would
of January
supposedly 1st. Have this apply to it, right?
Yeah.
And with 3 months of this is a fundamental change to the business relationship between the developer and Unity and the other platforms, right? Enacted without any initial like meaningful communication and feedback from the users, with a 3-month time window for people to adjust, where the primary use case for the product is to build businesses around that spend 2 to 6 years using that product to develop their product, right? As in like a 3-month window to adjust your business plan. Because if they again, ignoring the fact that this is a stupid business model, the fact that they did it in this way where it's retroactive and gave people 3 months notice.
Yeah.
Is all, even if it was a good move, right? Would have been
3 months notice is not a lot of
that's
fucking
not
time.
enough time. If they instead were like, okay, in 2 years, we're going to change to this business model, right? Then it actually doesn't matter as much whether or not the business model sucks because people actually get to make a decision. Do I want to engage in this business relationship with Unity or not? But here, what is basically happening is that everybody is being forced to, under the cost of them basically losing their own business, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a real choice they get to make unless they are in a really good position where they just have an infinite runway and they can spend the time to like actually have the options that they want. But even if you can switch to a different engine, the cost you're now weighing the cost of doing that, which is enormous. Because like we said, it's a year of a studio's time at least, right? So you're talking like for even a small studio, you're talking $1 million, right? To like shift to a different engine. So you still have to then decide.
And you haven't generated any new projects or revenue in that time. Like it's just you've just lost all that time and money.
Well, we've lost a year's worth of games. Is what happens, right? As everybody switches to different platforms, right? But
and I think, and also you have career people, right? Who it's like if your career is in Unity, you're like this is what I mean by the scorched earth level of destruction you're talking about here.
Yeah, and the end result of all this is that because because basically, because again, independent of the details, what Unity signaled is, hey, we are willing to change the terms that we have with everybody in ways that nobody has ever seen before, that have unpredictable and potentially cataclysmic consequences to you, our business partners, and to the industry as a whole. And we're willing to do that. Right. And in fact, we want to. That's our goal. So now, even if this all gets walked back, right?
There's no trust. It's all gone.
Yeah, the trust is gone, which means that people are still going to try to find ways to get away from Unity because it becomes an untrustworthy company. Like I wouldn't trust Unity. It's one of the discussions we have internally all the time about Game Maker, right? Because our entire studios, our entire livelihoods, our employees' livelihoods, our studios' long-term success, our ability to do this for a living and not have to go out into the job market and do something else, right? Mm-hmm. Really all hinges on what Game Maker does at this point, because we're so invested. So we have to trust them as a company. Mm-hmm. And the moment we don't, then we have to start figuring out how, we got to start figuring out how to exit. And that becomes one. And again, that like even the best case scenario where we decide to do that, like Seth said, we're not making games now. We're now figuring out how to secure enough of a runway that we can transition. And that's what we're doing instead. And so again, there's now this like year or 2 year period where successful studios, because they're the ones who could even make a pivot anyway. So successful studios who would be making the kinds of games that people want
can't.
They just can't. And there's suddenly
they have to scrap whatever they're doing. So like
just this absence of games that would have existed.
I think the way shorthand for me is that Unity essentially said that they're willing to destroy a large portion of the industry in order.
They're willing to destroy millions of careers and tens of thousands of games.
That's the
to try to hit a quarterly earnings target.
Yep.
Like that's legit. And like it goes deeper where like most of the C-suite and board members at Unity have been just massively offloading shares for the past 6 to 12 months. So like the CEO has only sold shares this year. He's sold 50,000 shares. So like I think in 2019 it was or something like that Unity had their IPO, or maybe it was around like 2020. It's not too long ago. So they became a publicly traded company.
Yeah, that's always the first step in destroying your company and reputation, is to
because as soon as you've got your IPO, you've got to hit quarterly earnings targets, and the decisions become increasingly unhinged and unethical as growth slows. Like this is just what happens with all companies, right? All publicly traded companies. And even back then, they had started making some changes to their pricing model and subscription model that developers didn't like. And Unity walked back some of it, but to sort of like try to mend the strained relationship that Unity had with their customers, with the developers, they said, hey, okay, we're gonna take our terms and conditions and we're gonna put them into a GitHub repo so that everybody can see a full history of all of the changes to our terms and conditions as they happen. And also we're setting it up so that whatever the terms and conditions were at the time that were like associated with the version of Unity that you're using, that's what you're agreeing to. Mm-hmm. So if we change the conditions, that makes sense, right?
Like that's what I would call a reasonable approach to a licensing agreement, is that the license agreement is for the thing. That
it's for the thing that
you're using.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so they said at that time, like when we change the terms, that will be connected with a newer version of Unity. And then you can choose to upgrade to that version and accept the new terms, or you can stick with the old version, which, there is kind of a catch-22 there as well, because like you can't just stay on an old version forever because you've got to stay up to date with compatibility. But at the very least, it has the illusion of choice, right? But in June of last year, they deleted that repository, so people can't see the terms anymore. And at the same time they did that, they also removed the section from their terms about the terms only being connected to the version that you're using. Mm-hmm. So somehow or another, for at least a year and maybe a year and a half, there's basically been some kind of intentionality.
It's because it's long enough that everybody will have upgraded to a new version of Unity, and therefore agreed to the new license agreement that doesn't prevent them from retroactively applying new terms. because because you can't like just supersede a license that says you can't do that. That's not how things work, right? But they made it so that they kind of just snuck in there and were like, oh, hey, now you're agreeing to anything we want at any time.
And then once you've agreed to that, then the next thing you agree to is the bad thing.
So I think what's even wilder about this is that now news is coming out that employees at Unity, people who actually build the damn thing, not the C-suite, but the people working there, had heard about this internally a while ago and had, of course, plenty of opinions, the same as all the game industry does, being like, this is some of the dumbest shit I've ever heard. And they tried to stop it. And we're also surprised about the announcement. And are now
because
leaving.
they made all their concerns known internally, and they're like, they heard about this plan, and then droves of Unity employees went to their higher level management people, and they were like, I heard about this. This can't be real because it's so stupid, but like, don't do this. Here are the reasons why. If anyone's actually thinking of doing this, don't, right? So they all said this.
Well, apparently they all said there's like an insiders sort of like a Unity insiders kind of thing. They have like a Slack channel or something, right? For people outside the company, like successful indie heads and stuff, right? Because somebody had said that they were given that announcement to preview it like the day before or something in that sort of insider to give feedback, and of course all of them said the same thing as they were like, "Don't do this. This is going to be really bad." And so the thing so basically like the obvious like truth here was that the people who are deciding to do all of this stuff have been doing this whole like fake feedback thing where they're like, hey, give us your feedback, and then just fucking ignoring it, right?
Yep.
So they go to the employees, are like, what do you guys think? And the employees are like, no, don't. And then they're like, we're gonna do it though. And they're like, okay, let's go to our like our favored, like indie developers, external developers, right? And ask them what they think about it. And then they're like, nope, don't do this. And they're like, well, I think we're going to anyway, And then they launch it, and then the whole fucking world is like, hey, maybe don't do this. And they're like, no, you just don't understand. We're trying to make more money. And we're like, no, we get it. We get that's what you're trying to do.
Yep, we understand.
But don't.
Yeah. But what's there to give feedback on? Like if somebody comes, like let's say your landlord, let's say you're running a shop, okay? You're running a shop in a busy pedestrian area, right? And your landlord comes to you and they're like, hey, Betty, I want to get your feedback on this new policy I have.
Every time somebody walks through the door.
Every time somebody looks in your store window, I'm going to put some cameras outside. Every time somebody looks in your store window, I'm going to charge you 20 cents.
Yeah, because that's advertising.
What do you think about that? Oh, what's your feedback on that? Then you'd be like, what the fuck is this? Like, what is in it for me? What's the upside of this? And they're like, no, there isn't any. I'm just going to take your money. Can you give me some feedback about this? It's like, don't do that, please.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to do that, right? Like, what were they? Why were they even pretending to get feedback about it? Like it's such an obvious.
Actually, it feels like to me
pure negative.
Have you ever like proofread someone's paper where they clearly didn't actually put any fucking energy into it, and so you're like, I can't even edit this because there's nothing to edit. It's so dumb or it's so bad that like
somebody says, can you proofread this? And you're like, is this a joke?
Yeah, that's essentially what this is, right? It's like someone hands you a plan and they're like, look at this dumb plan, and you're like, that's just a really dumb plan, and they're like, I know, isn't it great? No. Absolutely,
there's nothing good about this, right? And so like Adam and Sam were saying, whether or not they backtrack on this doesn't matter anymore. Like it'll matter in the sense that if they backtrack on it, at the very least,
more time.
Some developers will have enough time.
Yeah, it actually matters a lot, but it doesn't matter to the long-term survival of Unity as a company.
Yeah, because long-term, nobody is going to recommend anybody pick up Unity. Going forward.
But I think it's actually an interesting part of the problem is it already looks like people are trying, like people who have large financial stakes in Unity are in the cash extraction, like, oh, this is a failed business phase. Like this is this kind of behavior, right? Mm-hmm. And so if that's the case already, where they're already like, okay, we're just going to pull as much money out as we can while this thing burns to the ground around us. And then they've made such a colossal fuck up that they've basically guaranteed that the long-term survival of the company is now at much more risk than it was before they did this. That actually increases their incentive to just go ahead and continue burning it down because they've made it so that they can't undo this damage, right?
Yeah, they can't.
Because there is one way they could, but the problem is that that's not how companies, like public companies, work, right? The one way they could is put some heads on some spikes.
Yeah, fully backtrack, fire the entire
C-suite and the entire board of directors, the whole thing, top
Well, and like this can happen. This can happen via a shareholder motion, right? So like if the shareholders come together, but again, like who holds the shares? Well, a lot of the shares, well, I guess were held by the people at the top. They've sold them all now. So, so this is easily
unbelievable.
I would say like this is I went to business school. I have a business degree, economics and finance. I did a lot of case studies. I've thought a lot about business.
Yeah, tell us, businessman. What's this about?
I've never seen this bad of a business decision in any industry ever.
Yeah, we just saw Twitter, folks. I mean, like we're still seeing that. And this is it is worse. It is actually worse.
Actually, I think the Twitter one is comparable in like just the degree of destruction and like
except most people who even people who are successful on something like Twitter don't make their money off of that platform.
But that's actually there is a significant segment of people who basically like their platform was created by the existence of Twitter, right? And then who continue, and this is like especially true for like new web projects, like the places where there is like an active community on Twitter of people who like share stuff, whatever, that actually is the discovery mechanism for initial discovery. Like I would never say it's like the thing that makes it so that you successful.
I guess
but there's enough stuff there. There's enough people who like truly are meaningfully financially impacted by the stuff that's happening at Twitter. It's not the same scale,
but the difference,
right?
Yeah, but the difference here is using Unity could financially ruin you. It's not like if your stuff doesn't work out well on Twitter, you just don't get views, right? But
you stop getting money you might have otherwise gotten. But you don't.
It would be kind of like let's say Twitter, like let's say Elon Musk announces, he sees what Unity's doing and he's like, I can run up this.
Oh, don't tell him. Right? Please don't. Nobody tell him.
And he goes, you know what? Every time somebody retweets you, I'm going to charge you 10 cents.
I mean, he basically did that with the API changes.
No, he throttled the API. But he didn't make it. He didn't make it so that you yourself are going to get charged a fuckload of money.
But he made it just like with what Reddit is doing, right? Where they made it so that if you're trying to provide additional services on top of them using their API, right, to like sign in with Twitter, post things on your behalf, whatever. That kind of stuff, right? They started charging exorbitant rates for those, right?
That's true.
Which is the same idea, really. Like,
it actually is the same idea.
And what they did, and what happened when they did that, same thing that would happen with Unity, is they destroyed that market segment, right?
But important difference is that Reddit is a standalone platform, and Unity is not. Unity is a tool, right?
Yep.
So like Reddit still exists because people use Reddit, right? And like it
is the thing that is consumed, right?
Yeah. And like Unity only exists because of the games made by it, right? Yes. And so like if you make it so that as a developer, if you're just trying to decide what engine to use, and then you see that, wow, if a bunch of pirates play my game or if I make a demo that takes off, I'm fucked. Like as in like I am going to be $1 million in debt to Unity, even though I haven't made a cent myself. You actually cannot choose to use that engine. Like
no, that's the worst business move you could possibly make. Is
you literally can't use it.
Yeah.
So they've just Unity has 100% in one day taken themselves completely off the board.
Yeah.
As a viable engine. I've never seen anything.
It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible.
And again, like I said, if they backtrack it, it won't matter. Because nobody will trust them ever.
I think to Adam's point, I think if you don't see every single head on a spike from this, every single head from on that top level, the board, the C-suite, and then they're saying, we're bringing in someone who actually fucking makes games to run as the CEO. Like if they don't do that whole thing, then there's already basically no chance, but there's really no hope.
Yeah. I'd say that would bump it up to a 5% chance.
I think again, it's the amount of. The thing is, like, people want to be able to stay on Unity because the investment cost is so high.
Yeah, nobody wants this.
So I would actually say that they can still get away with a pretty they'll be able to in the shorter term. By short term for games, I mean like decade actually, or 5 years anyway. They'll be able to get away with doing a pretty bad job of backing it up, right? Where they don't earn back enough of people's trust, but enough where people stay on the engine when they're already on it, right? Because that's still the best option. But the amount that they're going to have to do to create, oh, right, exactly. But
if they backtrack,
if they backtrack it to some extent, right?
Yeah.
But unless they can find a way to rebuild trust in them as a company and how they're going to relate to you as a developer, the long-term impact of this move is just the destruction of Unity, because people will be finding ways to get off of it. And it's also going to creates this new market, right? Because like one of the things like that's been kind of funny to watch is all the other game engines kind of, and which all have their own, they all have their own ecosystems, right? I just saw GameMaker announce today, I think, that they're now giving you free exports to all platforms for like 3 months to like help you shift.
Come look at this.
Right? They're like, come check out what we got going on. And like, and also like Godot, like the Godot engine is just seeing all this news, right? People love the Godot engine.
Yeah, because it's open source and it can do 3D. I think it's tougher to do like console ports.
Yeah, they don't have console stuff. Yep.
But
still, it's a good engine. People seem to love it, right? Like the main reason that we use GameMaker is because again we're invested, but also because it's one of the 3 game engines that you can use and basically out of the box port stuff to all targets that are financially viable, right? It's like it's basically it's GameMaker, Unity, and Unreal. Even it's weird because GameMaker's not. People usually mention Godot and like a bunch of other.
I think it's just that
are good engines, but they're not actually good business products because you can't build for all the different environments that you need to out of the gate.
You can because people will say you can because it's open source. Right? You can just expand the engine yourself.
Yeah, you can invest enormous amounts of your energy doing it, of course, but always.
Well, and this is even to the point where like this is such a bad move and it jeopardizes developers' ability to survive so much that publishers have come out and said, going forward, whenever we receive a game pitch, we will need to know whether it was made in Unity or not.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to get funding for anything because again, the publisher would. The publisher's basically saying like, yeah,
if your game does well, then your studio ceases to exist, and then now what? Like, how do we we've published your game, but then you can't maintain it.
Well, it's not only it's actually worse than that though, because you'll be governed by the license agreement that you have with Unity, and so what they can do with their agreement with the publisher can do with their agreement with you is they have to now say, okay, given the terms you have with Unity, which means that now your revenue, quote unquote, right? Because usually like your agreement with the publisher is like, okay, after the store cut, we take X%, or they'll say before the store cut, we're owed X%, and so now you're like, okay, then now the store gets that much, you calculate the percent, and then either way,
it's revenue based.
It's revenue based, right? And so now with the publisher, they're going to say, okay, you now have unpredictable and potentially negative revenue, right? Because we can't step in and take our cut until your other agreements, or in a way that doesn't already work with your other agreements. And because the Unity stuff is not revenue based, then it can't just be because what everybody else does is they're just like, okay, well, we take our cut, you take your cut. Everybody just eats into it in this predictable way.
What's so mind-boggling about this is like, they could have just done a royalty like fucking Unreal. Like
they could have just done
5%.
Everybody would hate that, but everybody would understand it. And they would be
also, it's easy to do. You don't like this idea that they can somehow magically track everything. Like,
I think you can track royalties. You can track revenue.
Well, this has tech bro stuff like all over it, right? Because it's the idea of like, oh, we have a technical solution to this problem, and that is because it is true that like it's just like with taxes, right? If you are a third party like Unity, and you say or Unreal, and you say like, I want 5% of your revenue. Then part of the agreement will be that they'll probably be able to audit you if they want to, but that's really expensive. They would have to decide to do that, right? So they're basically now saying like, well, it's up to you to actually like uphold your end of this agreement because like legally you have to, but if you don't, we would have to discover that before we could actually do anything about it. And so again, just like with American style taxes. Although unlike with American style taxes, the government does actually know how much you owe. They just won't tell you. They just won't tell you. You just have to also figure that out. But Unity can't know, right? And until they audit you or something like that. So so it's even worse than all of that.
Mm-hmm. It's worse than everything. It's
just terrible. It's genuinely the dumbest shit. And I hope that by the time this podcast comes out in a couple of days, that they have walked it back, at least to the point where, again, most of the fucking industry is destroyed. Because, like, I know a lot of people who are listening to this use Unity because most of the fucking industry does. And it's like, it's horrible. Just straight up. It's just terrible.
Yeah. I mean, no other comments. Like,
just fuck these people. I mean, what?
A buddy, one of my WoW buddies pinged me earlier in the week and was like, I saw this Unity announcement. I'm not really in the games industry, but like on its face, this seems really, really dumb and bad. Like, is there something I'm missing? And I was like, no, that's the whole thing. Like, you completely summed it up.
It's exactly as dumb and bad as it looks.
So I don't know. I mean, that's the news for this week, and I feel terrible for people. Who have spent the past decade or more building up teams, building up their careers and their studios and their livelihoods on this, to just like have the whole thing be held hostage like this. Yeah. Like, it's just so fucked. I've never seen anything that's fucked
and
up
it's just
in the
like
games industry.
It's just so stupid because like the thing that you should know more than anything if you're a business person is that the most important thing that you have, especially business to business, because there's usually more relative power between two businesses than
there's more
business to consumer, right?
People relying on you.
Yeah. And also a lot more legal risk if a company is depending on your product, right? The thing that matters more than anything in the world is people's trust in your company, because as long as they have trust, they'll keep using your thing. They'll be like, well, I might not like this, but I'll, figure it out eventually. And we've seen this with GameMaker too, because GameMaker at the time that we've been using it has been bought and sold twice, right? And the first time was to a gambling game company of all things. And at that time we were like, oh no, right? And we were already starting to try to figure out how do we plan an exit, because we didn't trust that a random ass gambling company, right, would be a sufficiently good steward of GameMaker for us to continue basing our business on it. And then it turned out they got to run independently enough, and then they got sold shortly enough later to Opera, who again, we were like, Opera as a company, I'm like, I kind of trust them anyway. So like, I wasn't nearly as worried when they went to Opera. I was like, oh, actually, like I could see them being a good steward.
They got a good vibe, but like,
they got a good vibe. But then they've been like jamming in their GX games thing, and like trying to get people to make games for the browser where there's no money, because they're trying to sell their gaming browser, right? It's fine, but it's one of those things that the more they do that kind of stuff, the more you can just like kind of see the GameMaker community. And us included, be like, because what we're experiencing is that GameMaker is trying to start pushing like their own business model into our business model, right? They're trying to like push us into web dev and push us into these things, right? But and so you keep on seeing these like back and forth with the community and like backlash, and then GameMaker like pivots a little bit and tries to undo something, right? But there's still enough trust with GameMaker and Opera both, that even as these little mistakes come in and people are like, I don't like this, this feels bad and gross, then it doesn't cause us to lose faith in the company completely, right? We're just like,
yeah. And I think kind of on the similar line to that, it's like Unity has their own ad system and stuff like that. And with this fucking weird like install fee thing,
they're going to waive it if you use they're
going to waive it if you monetize your game through ads, through Unity ads.
Yeah.
Right. And so like
this would be kind of like so gross.
Yeah, it would be kind of like if GameMaker, like, it's like they're working on the Opera GX game stuff, which doesn't pertain to us and doesn't pertain to most people, but like that's something that they're trying to push, right? But it doesn't really matter for us.
It's just irrelevant.
But if they said, hey, we're gonna now charge you like $300,000 a year if you publish a game on Windows, unless you also make a GX version of it, right? Then that would be something where we'd be like, oh, this is fucked. Like this is way too much. And like that's the point where like once you start threatening somebody's financial survival unless they get on board with your weird business model, then like it's not the trust is gone, right?
Yep.
So I don't know, like Sam was saying, I hope that next week, by the time this episode comes out, everything is different. I hope there's some heads on spikes.
Heads on spikes.
Yep. Not literally, but well, if it happens, it happens.
Yeah. Hopefully these poor millionaire C-suite people land on their feet, after they get axed.
Man,
They have
touch
golden,
the
they have
grass.
golden
people
parachutes
just
for days.
people just don't think enough about how hard it is to be a $100 millionaire CEO of a
It's
company
really hard to make catastrophically dumb decisions
and
I
face
can get
no
behind
meaningful
that.
consequences. Like,
Yeah.
can
Well,
you imagine
I'm sure,
how hard that would be if that was? What
I'm
your life
sure
was?
Crying
between
into
I'm sure
100.
between now and when this episode airs, there'll be some kind of public statement that they'll make about how they had to do this. It's just as hard for them as it is for anybody else. They don't want to do it, but it's just
They've already
going forward.
they've already been saying things like this, and again, the apologists for them are saying the same thing. They're just like, well, they have a right to do this. Like nobody's questioning. Well, actually, there's a legal question there because of how stupid it is. But like nobody's really questioning that though. It's
They were
not
like,
about
yeah,
the
but
right
Apple's-
to do it.
Apple's made it so we can't track people with our ad SDK as well, so we're not making as much money on ads.
Yeah, it's like that's
We're like,
not.
GDPR made it harder for us to make money on our Unity ads.
that's not our
platform.
problem.
It's like if you need more money, then
Stop paying your fucking C-suite so much.
yeah, or just like increase the subscription price a little bit.
Well, they did that too. And actually,
That's-
part of the hidden thing here is they also made it way harder to be a mid-tier indie because
That's
they
true.
got rid of one of
Yeah.
the kind of the middle of the road subscription tier. So you can now either not have enough because you're on the free one to like actually do what you need to do as a business, or you have to go into their like pro plan that's like the really expensive one. So they also cut, and of course that's being drowned out because that actually definitely has just an immediate instant impact on everybody, right? And that's being drowned out by the just sheer and absurdity of this other part of the announcement.
Yeah, probably a good a good analogy would be like if you bought something from DoorDash and they were like, "Hey, just so you know, we're going to charge you $10 for every mile your driver drives."
Mm-hmm.
Right? And there's no indication of like whether or not the driver is actually sticking to the route or just going on loops around the city, So like it's just if they made that announcement, everybody would be like, "I'm sorry, what?" Like I actually can't use this anymore. Like it's not that I won't, it's that I actually
cannot.
can't. Right. So like this is kind of the equivalent. So I don't know. I hope it all changes. We'll see. And good luck.
It's it's just an interesting shakeup, because there historically hasn't been that much drama around engines, in the game space. You see a lot of it in like the web dev space because there's just there's so many frameworks and so many everything, right? And like so many, and so each one is so popular because there's just so many people doing web dev, and so there's just like tons of drama all day, every day about the companies running these and the people involved, all this kind of stuff, right? And you see this now and then in the games industry, but it's always like the scale is really different because it's a smaller number of like teams, but with larger amounts of money kind of involved, right? And so it's a different kind of thing. And this is just the biggest sort of spectacle around game engines and around business to business, like game engine developer and publisher models. It's the biggest thing that we've seen in the time that we've been doing this.
Mm-hmm. It's so bad.
Like what else?
It's so bad.
What else was there that was even close to this, And there have been some bad decisions, like NFTs, when people were trying to shove that shit and everything. Like dumb, bad, right? But
you could just ignore it.
You could just ignore
not.
it, though. And you could just kind of laugh at how dumb it was because it didn't really matter that much, right? I mean, again, all these things matter a lot because they have some kind of real
In
world
specific
impact
context
in specific
or
context,
something,
right?
yeah.
But in terms of like the big picture, like
You could just
It's destroying the industry. It's
Yeah.
a good question. And it's like, no, it's usually not. Usually not coming close.
Yeah.
And
then-
this is like,
and this comes along.
is
But,
a little
but
bit
this also kind of just it demonstrates what happens when things get really entrenched, because like at the same time, Steam has like a 95% market share.
Yeah.
Whatever they decide is going to dictate the livelihoods of developers. I think they at least seem to understand the trust aspect of it, right? And they tend to not do.
And they've
things
made
that
some
would-
questionable decisions, definitely, right?
they've made plenty. But you see that, and you also see that since Epic did its big thing a couple of years ago, they suddenly got far more communicative about everything. They've suddenly started, it seems like anyways, fixing a whole lot more shit on the platform and improving it a whole lot more. Unless that timing was very coincidental, which I can't believe for a second. They got way more into the idea of very actively building trust. We didn't used to get we get like monthly newsletters now from them about like all the stuff they're doing.
Yeah,
I
trust
never
is
see-
everything.
Yeah.
It's everything. In an industry where people have to decide, they have to pick a product to stake their whole fucking career on. Like
Yeah.
Trust is the only thing that matters at the end of the day, right? So this is it's catastrophic. So we'll see what happens the next week, and I'm sure we'll have something to say about it. So that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. And as always, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list if you'd like to help us get more visibility. It is made in GameMaker, so it will continue to exist and will be launched as planned. So don't worry about that. So everybody, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.